Welcome to Two Bees in a Pod. I am Bilala.
And I am B. Leonga, and this is a podcast about immigrant experiences in the U.S., sharing our perspectives on various topics,
including straddling cultures, fitting in, staying connected, learning and unlearning the good, the bad, and the ugly. Welcome to another episode of Two Bees in a Pod. And this week we'll be continuing our series on grief. And today we have our guest, Sidney Ngochi. Welcome, Sidney. But before we get to your introduction, we usually start the podcast with an icebreaker. And this week's icebreaker is, what song reminds you fondly of a deceased one?
Song of a deceased one. I think Just Dance. I Hope You Dance by Womack. I forgot her name.
Leanne Womack.
Leanne Womack. Yes. So that's I'll talk about it later in the podcast, but I think that's the only song I have that reminds me of my late wife. Primarily because of one or two songs. There was a moment where and we're going to deep end right now. She told me, "Hey, this song is one of my favorite songs, and if you ever outlive me, play it for my children." And you know those kind of things you just kind of say jokingly to your partner, and you guys just keep life moving. And then a month later, she was deceased, and I had to play the song. So it's one that I will never forget. By Leah. So I Hope You Dance. Thanks for the reminder. Yeah.
Thanks. That's lovely. I don't know if I know the song, at least not by the title. Maybe if I heard it,
Yeah,
I'll
it's one of those
recognize
songs
it.
that you probably on like country radio. I was listening to country radio or something, but yeah, it's a very deep song. It's a motivational song, right? Of just looking past the daily troubles and just dancing, right? Just being. It's a good song.
Okay, I'll look it up. For me, when we were little, my dad used to love Billy Ocean. I don't know if you guys know Billy Ocean, but he has obviously several songs. So whenever I hear anyone, particularly there's one, Caribbean Queen. That's the name of one, and then there's another one, Get Out of My Dreams and Get Into My Car. Like, you know how when we were kids, obviously we did not have like streaming on Spotify, so it was just the cassettes. So you hear the same song like over and over and over. My dad used to love Billy Ocean, so like to this day, like when I hear those songs, like I can sing still word for word. And obviously it's a much older like artist. You don't hear it that often anymore, but whenever I think of those songs or whenever I hear them, I think of my dad.
See, mine is tied to Sydney's because a song that makes me think of a loved one. I have the Leanne Womack song, and then I also have this song. I think it's called "I Did It All," but it's the version by the New York Children's Choir. And because I guess we're going off the deep end from the jump. When Amabel, we're going to talk about her a lot today. Sydney's wife who passed away. When I made a montage that was used during the repast, and that was the song that I used. And when I was doing that, I think hearing that over and over and going through all these pictures for the first, I think I'm finally at a place where I can hear the song where that is not, I don't break down or don't go like into that place, but in that leading up to the funeral, I heard the song over and over, and I would picture the pictures that I was using to put the montage together.
Are you the one who picked out the song for that? For the montage? Yeah. Why did you choose that one?
I started off, what's that song that Charlie put? The one, It's Been a Long Time, See You Again. So See You Again. But I don't know why I decided to use the children's choir version. And so when I was using that, then I started listening to the other songs, and I felt like that song, I Did It All, represented her a lot better.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm definitely going to look up both of those songs after this. So thanks for the recommendations.
Yeah.
So today we have our guest, Sidney Ngochi. Sidney and I are friends and have been for a while now. I always say we talked on the phone before we met in person. And then the first day we met, we're not going to talk about that. There was alcohol involved, at least on my end. And then, I mean, like, we've been friends over the years, but I think the last 2-3 years, we bonded in grief and built deeper. So it's it's almost a full circle moment having this conversation with Sydney on the podcast. So welcome, Sydney. And
Thank you.
yeah,
Yeah, welcome, Sydney. It's nice to meet you. I did not know your wife personally, but I mean, I heard obviously via social media when she passed, like it was a huge, shock to
Yeah.
the Cameroonian community. And obviously, like from getting to know Bilola more closely since then, she does, talk about her a lot. So it's great to meet you. And thank you so much for coming on. We've been doing this series on grief, and I hope that it resonates with a lot of people because these are not conversations that we, at least not that I've seen, that we have frequently in our community, and I think it's definitely needed. So thanks for coming on to, share your experiences, and hopefully other people will benefit, and get some courage and strength from what you talk about today. So can you tell us why did you choose to come? I know Bill probably bullied you, but
Yeah.
other than that, why was it important for you to come on the podcast to talk about your experience with grief?
No, I think it's like you said, right? And first of all, actually, thanks for having me. It's always nice to see young Cameroonians kind of pushing the ante and exploring the creative side of things. But I think for me, it was the first time when Bill had asked that I actually had to sit down and think like, am I at a place where I want to, delve into that? Because I never really had to delve into my journey with grief. And I think it's one thing that I found that over the years, it's been 3 years now, a lot of people contributed towards my healing, from family to friends to networks to strangers. So if only one nugget, right, from this conversation can help somebody, we will all experience grief someday. It's one of those things we don't really get training for. It just happens to you in the order that it happens. So, just like other people's nuggets and stories help me solve one thing here or rationalize something else there. If I can help somebody, that would be great. So that's the primary reason that I joined the podcast.
Got it. So can you tell us about that experience of losing your partner suddenly? And you don't have to go into as much detail or as little as you would like, obviously.
Yeah, so I lost my wife in Amabel, what's her name, as you guys have mentioned multiple times, in 2021. So we had just moved out of Ohio to Florida with our 1 year old daughter. So we celebrated her birthday one week. The next week we're on a flight out of Cincinnati, Ohio, where we worked. I just got a new job in Florida. And we were just beginning to kind of get our footings out there, right, in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, with a new job, a new daycare. Our house had just moved, the movers had just come in. But being the social butterfly you alluded to, we had a huge network, and she went to Houston with the baby for memorial, her grandmom memorial, and uncles. And while she was there, actually, she had been complaining of headaches prior to that. So it was one of those things where, especially people who've been through childbirth and all of that, they have headaches. And so she wasn't sure if it was epidural or if it's because she had done her hair, because the baby was sick and she had picked it up. But it's one of those things that the more severe it got, right, we still kind of blew it away and said, all right, when you come back from this trip, we'll go to the hospital. And unfortunately, while she was on that trip, she passed away in her sleep at night on October 31st. So yeah, so that was a shock naturally for me where I was. While she was on that trip, I actually was in a class reunion. So my college class from Cameroon, Simon Shessen, did go to secondary college for a few years.
I'll resist the urge to roll my eyes anyway.
The brand is as advertised. But yeah, we had a class reunion, and reuniting with my class is one thing I committed that I was going to start doing. So I was in Dallas while she was in Houston, and the goal was that we were going to meet up in Houston. So when I got the phone call, I'd been out with my classmates till probably 5 that morning, and I got a phone call at 8, saying that hey, I should come to Houston because she was in the hospital. And so my thinking then was, hey, this headache's probably got severe enough that she went to the hospital. So my thinking going to Houston was, hey, let me go relieve the family. Yes, they had this memorial they were planning for their mom. And then when I got there, she had passed away the night before. So, and then, the journey began. So it starts with all the traditional levels of grief, right? The shock, the denial, surprise, all of it. So, yeah, so it's been an interesting 3 years. It's one of those things that, nobody ever anticipates it's happening to them. Like when life is good, when you're out in the club this weekend, you will never imagine that, hey, you might lose somebody literally at 8 a.m. now. So, um, so that's how, the my journey with this tremendous loss started.
Mm. So, I mean, I imagine when they called you, they said she was in the hospital. They just wanted to get you into Houston with as little shock as possible. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So yeah. So when I went to Houston, I mean, I remember calling her mom, just saying, "Hey, yeah, I'm just in the hospital. I'm going to go check her out. Don't worry, I'll call you when I get there.
Mm.
Heads up." And so yeah, when I landed in Houston, even when I went to the house instead of a hospital, it still hadn't clicked, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't. It's not something that you can imagine within the possibility set when you're.
Right, right.
So yeah, so definitely um, learned that lesson. And
So, on the first episode, we kind of talked about these stages of grief that are usually described, right?
Mhm.
And I don't have it up in front of me now to say like the actual stages, but did you find that to be your experience? Like, did you go through those stages kind of in the order that they typically say? And I'm going to pull it up now so that we can actually have it.
Yeah, I remember Googling this much later, but the answer is yes, right? In hindsight, without even knowing
Mm-hmm.
them, I can pinpoint to the
Yeah.
points where at first there's that, for this one, it was just traumatic and shocking, right? So I went through that shock at first, and then there's the denial, right? It's almost like a pinch me. It's like a dream that you can't wake yourself up from. So there's that denial that starts to go through. And then there is a moment, at least I went through, of the why did this happen to me, right? And I remember one of my aunts from Cameroon who had a similar experience several years ago, and I got on the phone with her. She called me, right, and she said, you know, don't I don't want to ever hear you say why me,
Mm.
because when God picked you up from the streets, those dusty streets in Bamenda, to come to America, when God gave you all the blessings, she literally said this, when God gave you all the blessings He's given you, you never said, why me? And so you have no right to say, why me in this moment. And so she was like, your vase is broken, pick up the pieces, put them back together, and keep it moving. Tough love, aunties.
I mean, that would piss me off, but it makes sense.
Yeah, trust me, you don't even have time to be pissed during those moments. But I mean, she said it with it was from a place of love, right? She
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't like she was scolding me or anything. It was just, I think she might have. I don't think she was crying, but she was also reminiscing about, hey, when she lost her husband, she got called. She got told to go to Bamenda because he was in the hospital, and then when she got to the hospital, they took her to the morgue. She was
Mm.
thinking, and they were like, hey, here's your husband. So she kind of walked me through her story and said, obviously she didn't deliver to me. So anyway, so that's the denial phase, and then I still vividly remember a moment where I'd look at Deanne. She was a year and a half. Deanne is my daughter's name. A year and a half old at the time, and I'm like, you can't imagine that you alone are going to be able to take care of this baby, right? And so I was like, if God had to pick one of us, why did He pick her? Why did He not me, right? Because
Mm.
she's a better partner to be alive for the baby, right? So you go through that why me stage, um, and then what's the last stage? Uh,
There's anger.
I did. I don't think I went through too much of an anger phase. There was just so much that needed to happen. I had so much that needed to happen, right, between the funeral planning and then, remember we had just moved to Florida, so I had a full house in Florida that I was paying, the rent on, that I probably wasn't gonna go back to. I'd been displaced with the baby because I moved back to Maryland with the baby, from Texas, and then started doing funeral arrangements from there. So there was so much that had to get done that was kind of clouding my mind. And then, yeah, so I took time to myself. Luckily, my job had unlimited paid leave for these kind of situations. So I had the leeway to not worry about work and my paycheck will come in for as long as I need it. So, so that's a blessing that, I, again, like my aunt said, you thank God for the things he gave you. So I had the time to really focus on myself. I had 3 months where all I had to do was do a funeral plan with all the support network and just get myself together and then kind of get back to working on just putting my life back together. Yeah, and then starting to get acceptance, I think, is the next one. And so that journey took longer, right? So you never really know when it ends or when you've accepted it or when you're okay. I think in my experience, you kind of just, there are those moments that kind of cycle back and you say, oh, last time I experienced this, I felt this way, right? And so eventually over time, I can kind of chart back now in hindsight and see how my acceptance or my reception to certain experiences changed over time. So, or even to your point, that would piss me off, right? Or my response to certain things. So being able to talk about her or how frequently I had those breakdowns and all of that, right? So you can kind of see the things kind of smooth out and it's like, okay, this is my life and then things are going well now and this is, and you start having some wins and, and life moves forward.
So you mentioned that when it happened, had you just recently started at a new employer, a new job?
Yes.
Okay.
A new company in Florida. Yeah.
Okay. So how do you think that has impacted the way that you view your career? I mean, obviously it was very unexpected, right? And you had a family and I'm sure you had a dream and a goal or roadmap for what your career would look like and your, family. How did that loss change your perspective on your own plans for yourself and then just kind of what you view now as your plan for your family in the future?
I think that question, and it's probably part of the cycle of grief, that question would have been different if you asked me at the moment versus maybe a year later versus now. I'll tell you that it derailed the plans I had, but it did not derail, call it the life that I'm going to live, if that makes sense in terms of from a career standpoint, right? We only get about 30 years to work if we're blessed. And, for most careers, you're going to have times when you're accelerating and you're going to have times when you're decelerating, whether it's a sick parent or you have multiple children or a sick spouse. So this is just one of those, right? In the grand scheme of things, mine just happened earlier than a lot of my peers. So now I can look back or look forward and say, yeah, there are some people who are probably an assignment or 2 or 3 year assignment ahead of me from when we all started at the same time. But there are also people who are still behind me, right? So you can, in that arc of time, you can kind of see that, I'm still within the band, so to speak. But when it just happened, right? If you think about new job, that excitement that comes with that, right? Your signing bonus. We just moved from Cincinnati, Ohio to Miami, Florida. We had beach day Saturdays, right? We had just got all the folks are coming down already. We go to the beach on Saturdays, right? We had just set up our, life insurance plans in terms of just like our financial plans, right? We're in the middle of all of that. So at that point, life was at its most optimistic for the family, right? The kid was settled in school, even though she was biting people every day. Yeah. Her job was looking very good. She was literally had just been told before she left on that trip she was going to get promoted the next week, right? So there were all these things that were on the up and up. So at that moment when she was gone, a lot of the shock too was also like, holy crap, what are we doing, right? We just moved. We just got this more expensive place to live in a more expensive city. Now I'm operating with one income. So at that moment, everything felt like it was. I also had a plan at work. I forgot who I was telling this to, but I had built it was the first time in my career I had a line of sight to an award, an industry award that I was trying to get. I had an agency partner lined up. I had the right assignment at work. I was coordinating a very big project, and I had everything coming together literally the week where she told it. So while I was away, I can kind of, my brand managers, whenever I check in on work, would tell me, hey, that thing that you aligned, the new leaders have come and they've kind of vetoed, they put something else in place, or they brought their own agency. So I can see that master plan that I had unravel, and that felt unfair. But in hindsight, it was just another thing, right? It's a different trajectory in life, and I'm still fine, right? It didn't change the grand scheme of things. So yeah, that answer changes depending. It would have been different depending on the moment.
And did you stay in Florida or did that change, kind of?
Never moved back to Florida, so I work remotely.
Wow.
So
Oh.
if you look at quote unquote silver linings, so when I left for Houston that week with my little pack and my club clothes to go hang out with my friends, I never moved back into that house. So when
Oh.
I went to Texas, my brother and my dad flew in and met me there. From there, we obviously, with the baby, moved back home to Maryland, where most of my family were waiting for me. And I've been there ever since. So I grew up in Maryland up until college. And so 11 years later, I'm back in Maryland.
Okay.
So
Wow.
I went back, packed the house, shut down the lease, closed Florida down for a little bit. But my job is still there, so I still get to drive or go to Miami probably once every 2 to 3 months for work.
So did you look at it kind of, I don't know if you processed it from that point of view, kind of this, was there a part of you that mourned not getting to live in Florida? I don't know if you had, Florida sounds like a dream, right? Place for many people, especially that Miami area. So was there a part of you that had really been looking forward to living there just based on the location?
Yeah, especially after spending 11 years in Cincinnati. It was nice
Keep
to,
it Ohio.
Cincinnati is fun. I had a great time in Cincinnati. I had a phenomenal network in Cincinnati. So I had a good time in Cincinnati. But there's nothing like a world city, right? Like a world class city where the world actually comes to you, right? And, so there was a part of me that missed living there, but I think um, just like I lived in Ohio for 11 years, like living in Maryland in the DC area comes with its own allure. It's still a world class city, probably a better one than Florida in terms of the relationships you can build here. My family is here. So I'm enjoying being back in the DMV where a lot of older friends are also here. I was the guy who left Maryland and went to Ohio after school, right? So coming back now, and my friends are all grown and married, kids, and all of that. So it's been a good welcome home, and then I get to fly to Florida, and the company's dying every couple of months. If I choose to
Yeah.
extend it, I can do that. So I don't
Nice.
I
think there
would
was much.
say, Sydney was on his way to being a Florida man. You know those news articles of like Florida man. He was crabbing in the back of the house. Like the house in Florida sat on like this waterway, and every now and again he will post himself with his bucket back there. And I always tell him, I'm like, you are living in the house with a Florida man.
The internet girlies said they want to provide her, right? What better than
Hey.
catch some crabs and catch some fish, you know? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's so funny. So you mentioned as part of your grieving process, right? Kind of asking the question like why not me, right? Like you've kind of felt like she would have been the better parent. Maybe better is not the right word, but you definitely felt like, God, why if you're going to take somebody, why her? So kind of realization moment where you were like, damn, I'm really going to be a single parent. I mean, of course, you have your family and your community, but was there a moment or kind of repeated moments where you were still in shock about or overwhelmed with the prospect of raising a child without her?
Yeah, I don't think I was ever overwhelmed just because since that day, there's never been a moment where I've had a full support network yet, right?
Mm-hmm.
I come from two big families. I love loving cousins, aunties. Cincinnati, the Cameron family of Cincinnati, we were both active members in, so we had a huge community there, friends groups, new friends, old friends, my class group. right? You can imagine the two class groups that were involved in that reunion. They kind of felt attached to me, build relationships there, right? So I've never really been, and then her friends and her family, right? So huge. There's almost too many people, so to speak, offering to help, and so that has been a blessing. That if you're beefing with your family, just family is family, right? And there's a reason why our cultures have the traditions we have, and sometimes you don't see them until you're the benefactor of. So,
Mm.
and that's that. But the moment when it first hit me was probably that first night when I was in Houston, right? And you're sitting there, and the way we had everything set up was I took care of all night shifts. So since Diane was born, from probably 11 p.m. all the way to 8 a.m., I was responsible for everything. I'm kind of a night owl, or at least I was back then. So I just took it upon myself to just let her sleep. I'll take care of the night. And then my bargain was don't call me from 8 a.m. to probably about 1 p.m. Right? That's all you. So sitting, and that has been our thing, right? I put the baby down in bed. I take care of her until the morning. The first time it really hit me was when I had to sit down and think, hold up, as a baby, Ethan was going to shower the baby. Those things in Houston. And there was that voice that always tells you, like, hey, you better get this started or your wife's going to, yell at you. Like, that voice was not there, right? So that was the first time I was like, holy crap, this is really going to be on me. And yeah, so it was a shock again. So you talk about the reverberations of the traumatic experience that was that same night. And then I would say flying back in and then making decisions without having to consult anyone. So when we flew to Maryland, one of the key tenets or things that I had was just to make sure that this did not affect the baby at all. Right? This innocent kid did not ask for this. So one of the first things that I don't know where this came to me was she has to be back in school just to go to routine, because she was a very routine. Anybody who saw her when she was, when her mom was around, the Annie was a very tight schedule that she almost kind of had it memorized. The baby did. So I didn't want to break that. So I pretty much went to she was in Primrose School in Florida. So I looked for Primrose School here because they're all the same college structure, same color, same lesson plans. And luckily, the one here, even though it was an 8-month wait list, was able to take her in and hold her while we found the daycare. Right. So going through and making those decisions without having to ask a partner, right? Those were the moments where like it keeps hitting you. And then now it still hits, but it's different, right? I give you an example. I went to pick up Deanne from school probably about 2 weeks ago, and when she came out of school, there was another black lady in the lobby waiting for us. And to one of her classmates yells, "Hey, Deanne, is that your mom?" And she goes, "No, my mom is in heaven." And then you can tell all the other moms in the lobby probably, just if they cry, they would cry, right? And she comes and said, "Well, that's my daddy." So you have those moments where you look at the kid and the innocence of the kid, and you're like, man, you gotta kind of play both roles for her as best as you can, and as much love as she's surrounded by, right? The one thing she cannot have is home.
I want to go back to, because I remember the night in Houston where Sydney, you went, you said, her routine. And I was looking at you like, what are you talking about, her routine? Like, do you know the day we've just had? And then I think I said it to somebody, or maybe it was me. I walked it back and I was like, you know what? You've completely lost control of this day. And I interpreted it as you needed something to put you back in control. Like if the schedule was what you needed for control in that moment, then I was going to. So I remember like going to get her ready and then coming to like, okay, I got the water and you can go give her your bath and like give you guys time to like have that routine and then, walk away from that. Because the first time he said, but she's on a schedule. I was just looking at him like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, there's probably some PTSD there, right? It's 6 p.m. Why is the baby still awake? But yeah, she was on a very tight routine, and as young parents, the advice I always give young parents which we learned because she was born during the pandemic and we didn't have too many influences to change. We got to build that routine, just the two of us and her grandmother. Was that when you put the kid on a very tight routine, they do kind of stick to it, even at a very young age. Um, but the benefit for a young couple is if your baby gets on the routine where they can go to bed at about 8 o'clock, you get to have the whole evening to yourselves. So you can do that. A lot of couples are stressed primarily because the kid is up to about 10 p.m. You have work the next day. By the time you get time to just the two of you, you can't watch a show together. You can't do some things. So that's something that in hindsight, I look back and I'm like, okay, the routine helped in that regard, right? At 8 p.m., there's virtually no baby in the house. It's just us, watch a movie, watch a show, call your friends. There's really no, it's just us. And so, yeah, the routine was very strongly enforced, not by me, but I learned through having a strong partner at home that you better do it.
Nice. So the baby was a year and a half, right, when Amma passed, and even an infant can feel the absence of their mom, although they cannot articulate it. So at what point did you start actually having like verbal conversations with her to the point where now obviously she can articulate my mommy's in heaven? When did those conversations begin? At what age?
I'm not sure she fully understands it still, because she was very young. Like a year and a half is very young. So that was my biggest concern too at that moment. Because remember, I don't know if it's some sort of instinct, but my main thing there was just to try to get some control around making sure that Emma's death did not negatively impact her in a way that would like permanently detrimental. So I had a family friend who's now a personal friend in Houston who had gone through something similar back in the early 2000s, Mr. Bonnie. And I remember that day he came and sat by me and he just said, "Look at me." He literally just when he found out he came to the house, and he just sat by me and he said, "Look at me. Every time you feel like it's all over, look at me and know that it will be better down the line." And he just kept saying, he said that, probably said that about 20 times. He just kept saying, "Look at me. We'll pray together, but just know, look at me and know that it will be better. You cannot see the path now, but know that will be better." And so he's been somebody amongst other people that I would call back then and say, "Hey, I must, when the funeral happens, they put the big picture in front of the house, right? I'm like, hey, Emma's picture is being put up. Is the baby going to look at that picture and then now start looking for her mom, right?" Because Diana was a social kid. She was actually enjoying all the attention she was getting, which was kind of an interesting juxtaposition, right? Um, and he was just like, "Don't worry about it. She won't remember it," right? And it's true, she did. So looking back now, I think there was a moment where I've made it a point to kind of show her pictures, videos of her mom. I think if you look at a lot of the gifts that she received during the funeral, a lot of the funeral gifts that came from groups, there were things to her that would make her remember her mom. That was the theme we had for the funeral, was just kind of remembering and telling her story, telling her story. So that has kind of kept on going, right? She has one of her mom's classmates they made like a Diamni namesake that had pictures of her mom. I remember one of my good friends in Cincinnati had an artist commission. I had created like a picture, a painting of Amma and Diana on her first place. So she's always kind of had that. The pictures were in the house, right? Who's that, right? There was no set time where I had to sit down and do it because it was always around her. Obviously, when we go to the grave site, you kind of have to explain why her mom is there. She can't go see, those kinds of things. But as they grow old, the explanation kind of evolves. So from what I understand from people, I think when it would really start to make the most sense is when it gets to probably about 9 years old or 10 years old.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a question though. Like in those first days, because I remember on that very first day, I held on to her, and my big worry, like, at what point is she going to do mommy? Like, if she's hungry or something. And I don't remember her reaching or asking for her mom at any point during the day. Like, when was the first time she asked for her mom? Do you remember?
She would cry and say, I want my mommy. But if you probe, even now, if it happens, it rarely happens, but if it happens now, you'll realize that she's just trying to get something out of you, right? And then what I've realized is that she doesn't remember. Again, she was a year and a half, so you can't really expect her to remember. But she does. It does become obvious to her when she sees other kids with their moms, right?
Mm.
But one of my family friends came with her daughter, who was older, and had a bag of the makeup kit. And she did Diani's makeup and did her daughter's makeup. And I remember seeing Diani literally in shock, right? Like this is what mommies do, you know, and my daddy's not doing it, you know. You know, and that was a sign for me too, like, hey, you kind of figure out how to compensate for some of these. But so those moments clearly pop up where she would say, hey, I want my own mommy, right? And it's really more like everybody's running to their mom and I don't have one to run to. So that's when you see it come around, but it's less of, hey, I want Ama because I miss her and I remember her. It's really more of all my friends are running to their moms and I want to run to mine. It's more of that kind of thing.
Mm. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know if she's already at the age where they're doing a lot of like birthday parties at people's houses, like other like out of school activities.
Yeah.
Because I wonder, do you find yourself to be the only or one of the few dads in certain spaces like that?
Yeah, I've always been a very active dad. So I'm used to, but yeah, literally, I just got a birthday invite to his house. So I'm gonna be the only dad at a birthday party here probably. But I'm used to. I've always been
Mm.
right. I did pick up some school drop offs. So, but yeah, I find it more and more. And I think a lot of times the moms kind of wonder why I'm her granddaddy and her daddy, her grandma. Actually, it's my dad and me do some school right now. And so I'm sure the other parents kind of wonder, but for us, it's just like, it's our normal. Yeah. So
Hmm.
sorry if you can hear her upstairs.
Oh, no worries. So you mentioned that it was very important for you to maintain her routine, right? After her mom's passing. Were there any, I know obviously like you left Florida, you went back to Maryland, but for yourself, were there any specific routines or practices that helped you through in the immediate aftermath of that process to kind of maybe center yourself or kind of deal with everything that was going on?
Yeah, there are a lot. Yeah, I think again, as the different phases, there were different things, right? Immediately, there was a grasping to fill that void, right? So you can imagine in today's age, you can still see them and hear them through WhatsApp, through Instagram, through whatever. So I found myself initially kind of grasping to fill that void, right? Whether it's just have a phone, where it's entered as passwords. So going through and, whether it's going to our old messages, right, or something. So I think initially during that first phase, that was the call it coping mechanism. And then the other one was I had to pretty much pack my shit and keep moving, right? The world was moving forward, right? Every month you sit there on your pillow, you have a huge mortgage and electricity and stuff you got to pay in Florida, power payments. So I had to quickly kind of think of a strategy or master plan on what I was going to do with literally my car. I left the house and there's trash in the house, right? And I hadn't been back. Those kinds of things in the Florida. So those things were kind of wearing on my mind. So part of the next phase of it was really sitting down. So she was buried in December, and January 1st, after New Year's Eve. I literally sat down and wrote all the things that I needed to do, right? And I think the list was probably about 50 things. So if you think about moving, what is involved with that, who's going to help you pack, what are you going to do with the clothes? We donated her clothes to our favorite charities. You have 2 cars. Do you need 2? What do you do with it? You ship them to Maryland, how much it's going to cost, right? You sell one, you try to sell it in Florida. When do you do that? Do you think about her bank accounts? She had a little Robinhood investment account, her job, closing that up. probate in Florida, it takes a couple of months, right? How do you even do that? Breaking your lease. When do you start work? So there was all these things. Again, the baby was in a temporary school. You got to find a permanent one. Which one do you choose? Setting myself, all my clothes were in Florida, right? Get new clothes. So there were all these things that I started having to kind of put together very quickly. And so that process quickly took over. So I'd say that was starting to cross things up and really getting some wins. When I talk about wins and saying, hey, that is done, that is done, that is done, was the next one. And then really, one of the goals I had was to make sure that the network that her mom had built, she would benefit from that, right? So I made it. A lot of Alma's friends with people I had never really communicated with deliberately before, but immediately after that, just because we had all gone through this together, I made a very concerted effort to build relationships with those people. So that also ended up being another thing. So, and then time, really at the end of the day, time, you got to give this time. So looking back at the communities and in family, my parents literally took the baby from me, right, when I came back to Maryland. And all I had to focus was on recovery. And that's a blessing that I think above all probably enabled me being here today. I didn't have to worry about a job. I didn't have to worry about food on the table, a place to sleep, what the baby was going to eat, or whatever. I tried to make sure her schedule was being there. And then really just focus on me. And if I wanted to get out and, I don't know, drive to Florida and back on my own, he was kind of like, yeah, go do that. I do that. Yeah. So I think those are the key enablers.
So by the time you went back to work, were you looking forward to it? Were you dreading it? What was that sentiment like after, taking that time for yourself?
I'm curious what other people think about it, but I was ready. Because staying at home and kind of hearing every time I check in, because I had 3 direct reports at the time, 3 brand managers, senior brand managers who reported to me. And every time I check in on them, because I didn't want them to kind of be without a leader guiding them through some of the crazy things that were going to work. You hear, hey, that project that you're working on, this is going, that project, this is changing. That started giving me some heart attack, some heartache. And I was just like, so I actually called my boss back about 3.5 months in and said, hey, I don't think I'm ready to come back full time, but this key project of mine, I want to come back in and take that back off your plate. Because she sent a message pretty much telling me, if you're going to take much longer, just let us know. It's fine, but we have to hire somebody because these are 2 projects. So what I did was say, I'll come back in and I'll take that project, and then you can keep everything else. But as we know about American capitalism, once you put your pinky toe in the door, the thing sucks all of you in. So I think I lasted a week before I was in the office.
Hey, you're back, right?
So I don't remember when I went back full time, but I don't think it was much further than.
So, clearly you had a lot of community support, family support. Did you seek out any professional support?
Yes and no. Had a lot of people around me who had gone through grief, right? My best friend lost his twin brother about 7 years, I think, ago. Right now, he went through that process. I was by his side. So he would just come and we'd spend time together. I had a former co-worker who had lost her husband during the pandemic to cancer. So she would just call in and just, she'd give me some very fun advice. And then Uncle Bonnie I talked about, so I had people I felt were always checking in, the call, we pray together or whatever, right? Talk about things, hey, what is going on? Issues, what are you experiencing? How are you thinking about this? So I had that. Professional wise, I tried to sign up to some therapists, and literally the day I called was the day after they had both retired. So I was just, yeah, they were highly recommended, but everybody kept pushing me towards this guy, David Kessler. David Kessler apparently is like the godfather of grief therapy. If you Google his name, literally the therapists tell you, like, while you're waiting for your first meeting start, like, go sign up, right? So he has a very well polished online program. You just put your email and he just starts sending you. I think he has a sequence of emails that come in brief. And then eventually when you're done, he actually has an institute where you can be certified and be a great counselor of his philosophy. So I'd get those emails and I just read them, right? So I never really went into a formal therapy. I actually did it much later. I did it about 2 years later. And I did it for a different reason. I had an employee who came in back to work. He'd lost his wife about 7 years ago, but he never really got to grieve just because he was in a very high-powered role at work, visible role at work, and he didn't have the time to really take off work. So he just buried his wife and went back to work. And 7 years later, he was breaking down at work. Right? He would talk to me. So that freaked me out. Right. I was like, hey, I might be sitting here gallivanting and feeling good. And then literally 5 years from now, I'm going to be in the middle of needing a work. Like, I don't, if that's around the corner, I better start getting help. So I went in and I used betterhelp.com for, and found a faith-based coach and therapist. And after about 5 or so months with her, I think the conclusion was like, she was like, hey, all the checks I'm doing, you're in a healthy place. Just keep doing what you're doing. If you need me, I come back. Right. So we're knocking on wood, and I say it lightly, but it's not a light thing, right? To say you've lost somebody and it's reverberating through every phase of your life over a long period.
Yeah, I saw a TikTok, and I think my phone is spying on me, obviously, because I've been seeing things about grief. But
Yes.
there was a TikTok video where, and it's kind of similar, Bilala, to what you shared on our very first episode talking about this, where you shared that picture of, grief is this kind of ball, and the jar to hold it is just getting bigger as you are finding the strength. The other analogy I heard was like, grief is like a stone in your pocket, right? It's a heavy stone in your pocket, and all that is happening is that you're getting stronger with time and you're getting more, skills to be able to carry it, but that stone is always going to be there in your pocket. It's just that you are getting more capable and stronger to be able to carry it through life. So I really like that analogy.
Yeah, I think it's that's accurate. And then I think the human mind is also built to forget, right? So as time goes on and you get more experiences, if I think back on that day, I don't have that same just gut-wrenching trauma that everybody felt that same day, right? I think that's in addition. So as time goes on, as much as you feel the pain and the loss, and in every walk of life, you can find, moments where that things could have been different. You're absolutely right. You just learn to live with it differently.
Hmm. And I mean, you alluded to something earlier, right? Like you guys were kind of on this, like a really good place, right? In your family, in your relationship, you have like these plans, like you've set up this like awesome routine with your baby. Like you guys, it sounds like based on what you're describing of that routine, if that baby was really going to sleep at 8 p.m., you had a lot of quality time together. So, and of course, you don't expect, that overnight or in the blink of an eye you lose your partner. And people say this thing like, oh, tell your loved ones how you feel about them. It sounds trite sometimes, but it's true, right? So, without repeating that same advice, what's something that you would want to share with people? And it doesn't have to be a romantic partner, because we could lose, you could lose a family member suddenly. So what do you keep in mind about kind of cherishing the people that you love, knowing that in an instant they could no longer be there? And that's not to say like we should live in fear, but how do we kind of more intentionally cherish the people that we care about?
I think it's just that. I see it in our community, especially coming out of the pandemic. People are celebrating a lot more. The advice I give everybody is celebrate your wins, no matter how small, because your losses schedule themselves.
Mm.
So it's your birthday, it's your promotion. You might not be feeling it. Do something, even if it's celebrate each other, celebrate your loved ones, call them something. right? So that's the first one. One that I kind of found later is how serious is it, right? You think about little family squabbles and all of that, right? I remember I was talking to a friend, and they had just two friends, and they had literally just separated. They've gone their separate ways. And I remember asking one of them, "Okay, if that other person were to die today, would you be in front of their casket crying and saying, 'I wish,' all the, over this stuff?" If the answer is yes, then pretty much shut up, right? So I think that puts things in perspective, at least for me. What I found is most people who are in those states, they don't care. They still kind of go their separate ways. But for me, that's in my model. And it's kind of like, how deep is this that we cannot resolve it now, right? Or at least keep in contact. What's happening. So that's that. The other one, I think a lot of people only find this out after they've gone through it, is be there for people who are going through it. Right? We are at the age right now where we're losing parents, we're losing grandparents, we're losing children. Is just be empathetic, right? Because people are going through it. They might not show it. So it's jangy, right? The way I say it, ever since this funeral, I've had many people who were there for me also lose people. I try to be, I try to be there for them. Like I would have wanted some of them to, or some people to be there for me. So I think those would be the three big ones. You're really more focused on self, right, rather than on cherishing others. It's really more things you should be doing every day, and obviously, yeah, call your loved ones. And take sicknesses seriously. Meeting a number of people, um, and share your stories and communicate, right? As Africans, especially African men, it's easy to know about stuff. So we're doing it. We're in America. Like my mom says, you have insurance, don't
It's crazy because when you were talking about the headache, I was sitting here thinking, I mean, whenever I have a headache, I'm like, is it
And
PMS? Am I dehydrated? Am I stressed? Or, I'm just like checking off the things. I'm like,
Yeah,
well, let me go
no,
and drink water first.
yeah, yeah.
no. Ever since that day, if I have a headadeche, especially when I'm going to bed, sometimes I joke with Tosi. I'm like, okay, hopefully I wake up in the morning. Like,
Real.
headaches don't feel the same. Like, I don't, it's like, yes, it's a headache. And then sometimes I'm like, okay, which direction is it coming from or whatever. But when I have a headache now and I take medication and I'm going to bed, I wake up in the morning sometimes, oh, I woke up. And I feel like
Real.
if I say to somebody I sound crazy, but those who went through this experience, they understand exactly, because I know people who after the funeral were like, I had a headache, I went to the doctor. Like, headaches have never been the same
There are
since.
actually people who had that headache went and found out that they were dying.
What?
So and I usually get those messages. So I have at least three of those stories over the last 3 years where, hey, my sister had a very bad headache and she couldn't attend the event anymore. And I was like, hey, that's the thing that happened to Amma. You should go, and they go find out she had like an aneurysm. So it's good to share those stories. Um, yeah. And so the good news for you, Beatrice, is that the way they describe it is the headache has to feel like the worst headache you've probably had ever. So it's not a small headache. But obviously in America, where you can go to CVS and look at a very high-powered drug and kind of pump it away, it's easy for us to kind of dial it back. But yeah, if you can, so we get a check.
Definitely. Good advice.
Yeah.
Good advice. So, what advice would you give to parents? Maybe either single parents or just parents in general. You shared really good advice about establishing routine. So, do you have anything else to share with the young parents?
Just love each other. I think that's the biggest one. It's easy for a kid to come in and take full control over your time, especially in America where we don't have as much help. So I think that's the big one, is deliberately love and give each other grace. I would say when it comes to the potential of losing one another, and this goes across generations, talk about it. It's not an uncomfortable conversation to have, but the day will come for all of us, unless both parents kind of unfortunately go the same instant. One person is gonna have to be laid back and execute the dreams and the visions that you guys had for your family, for the kid, whatever, right? So what is your vision in life? I know a lot of our parents talk about wheels and they don't have wheels, so make sure that your desires are clearly communicated, right? If you want a sound plate for your child, communicate it, as morbid as that sounds. But structurally, there are things that I think every couple should probably do. I got lucky primarily because we were in a place where, everything kind of goes through the phones, and I had access to her phone. So I can very quickly go in, make sure rent was paid, make sure um, that I can block certain automatic payments and coming out of her account, so I can move some of those monies out, right? Because you think about her cell phone bill, certain things, car insurance for a car that is being sold. There are certain things that you kind of want to, you could Google probate list, they'll tell you everything you need to do, but they're just having that access. So Apple actually has, I think it's like a next of kin feature.
Next of kin, yes,
You know what it's
yes.
called? On this other back. So if you call Apple, you can set up on your phone, and if you were to be, unfortunately, like pass away, your partner actually can get access to your phone, because most of the things that you need to do actually require that person's signature, and you don't want to go looking for passwords to emails to all that stuff. You'd be surprised how many things need email verification. So make sure you guys are each other's next of kin, and then make sure that your afterlife plans are set. It will make everything.
Good advice.
Yeah.
All
And
right.
then
I
build your
think I
network.
have a picture. I have a picture of that thing, the instructions on setting it. So I will share it also
All
on our
right.
Instagram. Yeah, the how to set up your next of kin so that
Yeah.
it's a
And
seamless
without that
transition.
police access, I think only the police can get access to the phone, something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's very important. You're gonna be, anything you want to do. I mean, you want to get a good picture of them from their phone for to print, and you don't have one. You want to check WhatsApp and get something that you sent to them and you no longer have. You want to verify. You want to send an email to the bank and say, hey, this person is deceased, and they're like, prove it, right? Because we're sending an email to their email, right? You have to be able to have access to all those things. So it's quite the journey. But yeah, ultimately just loving each other. So at the end of the day, that's the best part of life.
Any closing thoughts, Bilola?
I mean, I think Sydney has said a lot of everything, but the one thing that I've learned from his experience is show up for your friend. I don't know if Sydney, you remember telling me, like, people saying, if I'm here, if you need anything, call me, and you're like, you're dealing with all these other things, and that line is putting more responsibility on you. So if you know something that you think the person might need, just like, hey, I'll do this thing. And like we talked about in I don't remember which of the previous episodes on grief, like we have Instacart now, we have DoorDash, basic things, like people are overwhelmed, send groceries, show up in the ways that they're your friend. So imagine the things that they would need and show up instead of putting it on them, like, call me, because a lot of us don't like to ask for help
Yeah.
or don't know how to, and you're overwhelmed and you're like, this person is going through this. So when you open that door and make it known, like, hey, I'm here for you. I've read stories that somebody said their friend called every week and they will cry, and it's like, no, that's why I'm calling you. If you want to cry or just
Right.
do that, show up. It's just about showing up for your people and being present. And to add on to what Sydney said, it's like sometimes when you're mad at family, friend, ask yourself, is this thing going to matter in a week? Is it going to matter in 6 months, a year? Then why are you sweating it? Because like you said, if you're not talking to somebody now and then you hear that they passed away and you're crying, like, what good does that do for you? Where you could have called the person. Like 2 months before Amma passed, one of my friends from grad school passed away. It seemed like it was suddenly also. And so with these two things happening back to back, it's like it's really grounded me in the way that I approach life 80% of the time, as like knowing like I don't want to be a hypocrite. So there are times where I still think that I have time and I'm in control. But for the most part, it's just like, hey, if something happens to this person, would you be okay? And if I'm like, yeah, I won't be all right, I'll call the person. That's usually, but if I'm just like, should I okay? Then to me, that's like, that's my, I don't have to call or anything. But
Yeah.
it's just being very mindful that life is happening. And if you think about somebody, reach out. The day my friend Sharon passed away, I thought about him. I was in the kitchen. It was a Saturday. I thought about him and I said, I'm the one always reaching out. Yeah, he was the last person to reach out and he passed away that night. And it haunts me because all I had to do was like, hey, what's up? It would not have taken anything, but I was like, I'm the one always reaching out. And that was not true. So,
Mm.
Yeah. No, that's real. That's real. And you bring up a very good point. I think that's anybody who's in grief. And I learned this after the fact, right? And I've tried to be better ever since. But yeah, to be the last point, I'm here for you doesn't really do much. You can't take that to um, any emotional bank or physical. So if I can share just some examples of what felt helpful to me as your listeners are listening at the time, just things people did. Obviously, there are the text messages. I've heard about this. I preferred, right? But I'm giving you space. I think I had 200 phone call voicemail that night uh, from family, friends, her family. Think about who missed you, left the voicemail, called back, left the voicemail. So just those messages, I think literally just yesterday I saw a message I never read because I went to comment on somebody's Instagram and realized they sent a message like, hey, sorry, I found out your daughter died. I'm like, holy shit, I found out it was your wife, right? Like, so those messages, even if they're not read, they do matter. Advice, if you've been through something similar. I think for me, I talked about Uncle Bonnie literally sitting there and just praying with me and just talking like, hey, look at me and know it'll be better. That I think probably the strongest thing I needed to get that. But he can only do that because he know exactly how. So if you know something, then just be there. It's not like I'm gonna ask him like, hey, are you okay? Pray with me. CWA women came to the house that day and they just prayed the rosary. I think it was the first time I prayed the rosary in probably 10 years. But, just that, right? At that point, you're grasping for everything, so that just having people around the house, laughter. As a kid, I used to be angry, like, why would people be at a funeral laughing? Why do you come to the house if you're going to be cracking jokes? But I did find that grief is a lonely thing, especially when you get to your pillow at night and all the noise settles. So our community evolving to be there and just be with you is actually very towards your healing. I had co-workers kind of organize those care package deal I talked about. They ship, gifts, stuff like toys for the baby, food, that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, the food went to Florida instead of Maryland. Some of that got run at the door. And then friends who flew in and just came and just sat at me there in Maryland, flowers to the funeral, money. Right. I know a lot of friends groups, school groups put together and just put money. Funerals are very expensive, especially
Mm-hmm.
it's popular. If you think about weddings, funeral is the exact same thing. Just without the ID, right? Instead of a dress, you're buying a casket, but you're still gonna spend. So, especially for somebody who doesn't really have a lot of communities, so money helps. Those phone calls. I had a former coworker, I think, called, and she was giving me dating advice. Uh, I remember she said, no, because she just lost her husband
Okay.
about a year earlier. She said, I remember her saying, don't let anybody guilt you because she just started dating a year after this guy passed away. And I think she found out that her cousins were telling her they were not yet ready for her to move on because they were not yet ready.
Pardon?
Put her, and she was like, don't let anybody tell you the body has needs. Satisfy mine, for to satisfy yours, right? Like, and that sounds, if you're not part of it, right? That sounds like, why would they tell you that? But yeah, the body does have needs, right? And sometimes you need permission to say it is okay to date again. It is okay. You know what I mean? So anything you can give, you never know, right? And obviously don't ostracize. What else? Family being there, just coming to the house, cooking, bringing to the house, right? I had family who just cook and bring to the house because people are coming. There's a financial burden to that. Helping plan the funeral, volunteering to just do something. even if it's sing a song at the funeral. Um, all those things, volunteer to just family and friends who will just come take the baby, right? Bill we sent a lot of gifts to the Annie, and to this day, like we just wore one of the glasses this weekend in the Caribbean that Bill gave. But all those things and stepping in, godparents are actually another advice to parents: pick the right godparents, right? Don't pick your slay queen or slay king friends just because you feel that you owe them something, and then when you're no longer there, they're no longer there either. So pick wisely. What else? Yeah, the list can go on and on, but and then if you feel it too, just coalesce, right? So my best friends now, or the closest people I have now, are the people who we kind of latched on and kind of held each other through this journey. My brother, Bill, I'm not gonna go down the list because I'll leave somebody out and it won't be good. But I have a
Oh, you
tight group.
forgot send memes. Send memes.
Send memes to create some laughter, or share your pain through memes.
Yeah.
So that was that. But just there are so many things you can do besides just call and say, "Hey, I'm here
I'm
if you
here
need
if you
me,"
need me.
and then like check your box and move on with life, right? So
Right.
yeah. So that's a long-winded end, but hopefully one of those things is something you feel like you can do for somebody, and yeah, give them grace.
That was really, really good, Sid. Thank you for sharing with us. I know that I've learned something. I've learned a lot through this series and this episode in particular. So thank you for sharing that with us. And if you are our listeners, if you're reading along with us for our book of the month, it is My Sister, the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithwaite. I don't know if that's maybe an appropriate book for our September because we're doing grief, but
Maybe we should
We'll pick the
maybe
book.
we should
Got
change.
it.
I feel
Yeah,
like
yeah.
to go with the theme on grief, you might
I've
feel
already started reading it. You want to change it now?
it's a short story. It's Notes on Grief by which goes, the series. But Miss Adichie has a book on grief.
Oh, she does?
Yeah. Because she
Oh,
lost both
okay.
of her parents during COVID. And so I read that book after Amma passed, I was in my grief bag at the time. It was a good book. It's a short story.
Okay. So we'll have 2 books of the month then.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah,
Beatrice,
because this
what is it? My cousin, the serial killer.
My
my
sister, the serial killer.
She's doubling down on that.
Listen, it's good. I've started it already. Please don't do this to me.
I read it. It's a really good book. I read it.
It's good. Okay. And you can follow us on YouTube at 2Bs in a Pod, and we're on Instagram at 2Bs Pod. And until next time,
Any water to quench fire, which means any water turns off, extinguishes a fire. Sydney, what do you think that means?
Means the body has needs.
that was not my interpretation, but it makes sense. So the way I've heard it said is like even dirty water will put out the fire, right? Like now that you're saying the body has needs, now it makes sense in the way that I was not thinking. It's like whatever is going to put out the fire, put out the fire.
You pass up the opportunity, but yes, it means if you're in the desert and you're thirsty, anything that's water will do the job. Bill, is that what you meant by it? You said it, so you should probably tie the bow on this.
Yeah, basically, it doesn't matter, the type, I guess.
Whatever gets the job done.
Job done. Yeah. It could be stream water,
Listen,
water.
beggars cannot be choosers sometimes.
I think that's it.